My glasses are in between. I can't see close with them. I can't see far without them. I'm kind of I'm like an old toy.
Guess he's telling me to start. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Blackonomics. My name is Jim Clingman. As always, we give our thanks to Conscious Media Productions and Jim Alexander for giving me the opportunity to be here and to do this show. And we appreciate your comments and your emails, your phone calls, your interest in this show. And we look forward to hearing from you. So continue, keep it up. We're here today once again to interview a friend, first of all, well, two friends now, and to talk about business in kind of a different context. You know that our focus is economic empowerment and entrepreneurship, and we've brought several shows to you in that vein. And we're going to kind of get into some non-traditional thinking today and some non-traditional initiatives that I've alluded to over the past year or so during this show, but now we have some pragmatic examples that we're going to talk about today. And we're also going to talk about a new book that was written by my friend who's here today, Peter Block. The book is titled Community, the Structure of Belonging. And that's real important. If you recall, having watched this show, you know I've talked a lot about this thing we call community. And we're going to get into not only some definitions, but some opportunities, some challenges, some things that we can do in order to create and sustain what we know as community as we go along through the show today. So let me introduce my guest and get right to it. First of all, we have Sister Punani Burgess, all the way from Hawaii.
Hello.
Welcome to the show, Punani.
Thank you.
And I can call you
Pua.
Pua. That's good. I'll call you Pua. And my friend Peter Block. How you doing, Peter?
Doing good, thank you. Thanks.
Good for you to be here. I really appreciate you coming down. And it just so happened that Punani was in town from Hawaii.
Yeah.
And certainly with what she's done, and you will find out, those of you who are watching this show, you'll find out why she's here in just a few minutes. But I want to talk about, Peter, just, you know, our relationship. We've known each other for, what, 5 years or so
Yep.
now? And we met through issues that developed out of what was going on in Over the Rhine, and Peter invited me to come and speak at one of his groups that he conducts around the city of Cincinnati. And we've maintained our connection, our relationship since then. And I was really excited to know that he has a new book out. Matter of fact, one of your earlier books I found out about in New Orleans from a person who lives in Seattle, who works for the Gates Foundation. I was down there with the Entrepreneurship High School for a conference in New Orleans, and Peter Block's name came up for some reason. I said, well, I know Peter Block, he's in Cincinnati. And this lady who works for the Gates Foundation in the education section said that, oh, he has a fantastic book. I love that book. You know him. It was like he was a rock star or something, you know.
Right.
See, I know him, you know. But the book, the question.
The answer to how is yes.
The answer to how is yes. And of course, I have that book as well. And we're really excited that you have a new book out. And it talks about some things that are dear to my heart. And the way I found out about this book, because I hadn't talked to you in a while, a gentleman called me from Rochester, New York, and said, well, I see your name in Peter Block's new book. And he mentioned that you would be a good reference, a good resource. And I'd like to order one of your books. I said, well, let me call Peter and thank him for doing some marketing for me. And that's how we got back together. Of course, we met probably about 3 or 4 months ago. But I'm really excited about this book. And Peter, I want you to talk a little bit about the book, about your background, and then we want to talk to Punani about the exciting things that she's doing in Hawaii. And I feel very strongly that we're going to be able to share some information with our viewers and with the city of Cincinnati that will help us in our move toward true economic empowerment. Peter, give us a little background on yourself, and then I want to jump into your new book a little bit.
Well, most of my work self has been trying to help organizations and institutions become more humane, more democratic, more participative. I've consulted for too long to name, and most of the books have been about about empowerment. I wrote a book on empowerment in 1987. So until about 10 years ago, all my focus was how do you provide leadership and management to a system to make it a little more participative than it was before. All the evidence says that the more participative a system is, the more productive it is. But this country is so patriarchal, and our belief system is so control-minded, most people would rather maintain control than to have high performance. And so what I've done in the last 10 years is take these ideas of participation, empowerment, connectedness, team, and try to bring them into a neighborhood, a community. I've decided to show up as a citizen. When people ask me now, who are you? Number one, I'm a citizen of Cincinnati, Ohio.
Right.
And so in some ways, we've lost the sense of what it means to be a citizen, which is to care for the well-being of the whole thing. And so really the book and my work now is to say, can we come together in a different way with different people in a different conversation?
Right.
We're trapped in the old conversation. The old conversation is one of leadership is important. Every time we hold a meeting in the early days, people would say, well, how come city council isn't here?
Right,
and I say, why does that? We're here. Why are you always talking about who's not in the room?
Yes, yes.
And so now, so the book was kind of try to give structure to how to gather, because it's when we meet that we decide the future.
Yeah.
It's not by policy, it's not by expertise or funding, it's how we decide to come together and commit to something. And so the whole purpose of the book is say, what's the means by which we can create a future distinct from the past? Because most of my time I spend backing into the future.
Right, right.
And now, an element where we intersect is you can't just care about the community without caring about its woundedness, and you can't deal with its woundedness through social services. They aren't going to make the difference.
Right.
God bless social services.
Right.
We don't have too many of them. I don't mind if there's 50 on one block. I got 5 Indian restaurants in Clifton. They don't say it's too many.
That's
so
right.
why? So,
That's right.
but they've got to be. And so, economics. If you want to deal with poverty, for example, you got to help people start businesses.
That's right.
All right. The people that aren't making it, forcing them back into school isn't going to change their life. You know, education matters, but what are you going to do with people that hasn't worked for them? So we're starting an entrepreneurship project inspired by you. That's what I've always respected and appreciated so much about you. And you're right, you're an argument for economic self-sufficiency. And so I could talk later, but we decided, well, let's do something where people on the margin, we can help them go from a job to work. Go from being in business, which I learned from you this morning, to doing business.
Yes.
And they need a community around them. And so we're trying to create a community around 5 or 10 individuals to start with. To say, look, we're going to commit to you being economically successful, and then I know when you're successful, you'll return that to the larger community.
Right. And that's real important as well, as we spoke earlier, to return something. And we talk about it all the time, giving back and all of those kinds of nice philosophical terms that we use, but it's in the doing. And that's what I like about this book, is it's action based. It's not just talking about the problem. It's talking about initiatives and things that we can do just as a citizen, one person, to get things done.
All the examples I use in the book are individuals who decided to do something with others, never on their own.
Right.
And 90% are citizens of Cincinnati. So partly this book is to try to say, look, we have all the resources we need within 10-block radius.
That's right.
Why do we keep looking outside or looking up for a future?
Yeah. One other thing that I noticed as I've read this book, that you use NESS a lot, N-E-S-S. And I'd like for you to, if there is any meaning behind that. I notice you use that on a lot of words. It means something to me, but I'd like to know if it means anything to you, or is
I never thought of that.
The way you write? Okay.
I never thought. I'm sure it means something. Tell me what it means to you, and I'll learn something.
When I read it, it's inviting. It's those words that you use with nest instead of just using the word itself. It makes me feel invited.
Got it.
To participate. It's comfortable. It suggests that this is something that we can do with ease. There are a lot of feelings that I got from reading those, because a lot of the words that you use with nests on the end, I'd never seen them with nests on the end.
Do you have an example?
Woundedness. You just instead of being wounded, or instead of a wound.
I got it.
You look at a lot of words that
does
you
mean
use.
something.
Yeah. And I just wondered if you did that, by intent, or
the intent is to make the book as inviting as possible.
Well,
Part of the point of community is to bring hospitality, the welcoming of strangers back into the world. And I wanted the book to be an example of that. So there's white spaces, there's summaries. I try to write it in everyday language.
Right, and that's another thing too. Yeah, it's very easy to read.
I try to.
Yeah, didn't have to have a dictionary right beside me or thesaurus to find out what the words meant.
And the idea of woundedness, it's the condition that we're in. You try to find language that doesn't blame anybody and doesn't pity anybody.
Right.
In some ways, that the book is an argument against charity, because charity treats people as if they're lesser. And so the other argument of the book is to, why don't we look at our youth as possibilities, as gifts.
Yeah.
They're not problems to be solved. As soon as I call something a problem, I have undermined their possibility.
Right.
Because now I think they need fixing. And there's no future gets created with the notion I can fix you. I don't want anybody fixing me. I'm wounded also.
Right.
But I don't need to be fixed.
Right. Well, I think it's just a wonderful example of writing about things that are important and writing about issues that affect us, and turning those issues into possibilities, into opportunities. Here's another couple of nest words: aliveness and wholeness. I mean, it just goes on and on.
Thank you. I never thought of that.
Yeah, it's very inviting. The other thing I wanted to ask you, and I told my students at school, and I said, the first thing I'm going to ask Peter Block is, and I didn't do it, so I apologize to my students, but I wanted to ask you, what is your definition of community?
Care for the whole, connectedness.
See, there it is again.
Connectedness.
Yeah.
It's true. It's a condition.
Okay.
To be in relationship to each other. And the reason we came together was to care for something larger than ourselves. And I like community as a place. I care about a neighborhood, a home, a street. Community is a lot of times used for something very abstract. We're a community of interest. We're a social networking. Everybody invites me on their social network now, same with all of us.
Right.
I keep thinking I should tell them, I never look at this. But community, to me, is connectedness, care for the whole of this place, my neighborhood, my city. And otherwise, it's not grounded, it's an abstraction. But it's something about the whole. It's an extension of my family. And it's also, community is a requirement that I can't be successful if I don't operate in the context of a larger community. And so we're so individualistic that in a way it's trying to balance that a little bit.
Yeah. Do you see a significant difference between community and neighborhood? Are there criteria that are required for a community versus a neighborhood?
Exactly. The neighborhood just means we live next to each other, and most of us don't know the people next to each other. So we've lost the sense of community. So community, you could say, is a spirit, or to me it's a social fabric of connectedness that I want to bring to my neighborhood, because the neighborhoods now, we're so isolated. And the better off you are, the more isolated you are.
Right. Well, I want to get back to this conversation. I want to bring Punani in and talk about some of the things that she's doing in Hawaii. And once again, I am so honored to meet you this morning from our brief conversation, and I'm sure that the audience is going to be blessed by what you have to bring. But I'd like Peter, Punani's your friend, and I'd like for you to just kind of give us an introduction of Punani.
Well, I met Punani by listening to her, to you. We were at a conference convened by the Democratic Party of Hawaii with the idea that a party should be more than an election device. And she was one of the early speakers, and she spoke so simply. I was just stunned by the clarity in which she understands community. And the other thing that Punani has done is grounded her spirit in economic questions. That her commitment to the vulnerable or marginal people in her community has been to help them become even economically self-sufficient.
All right.
So when you find a spirit and a poet who's a business person and commitment to that, you pay attention.
Yes, yes.
And so that's my story about you, which is too small a version of who you are.
We're gonna get into it with it. But, welcome once again. And as we spoke in your introduction to me earlier, you talked about an initiative that you're doing, and it's one piece at a time. That's the name of the initiative. One piece, and piece is spelled P-E-A-C-E. And I'm very, very interested in having you come and to share what you're doing with our viewers, and to talk about replication, duplication, how we can use what you're doing, because I always believe that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. If somebody's doing something, if that's a best practice or a model that works, then we should look at using that as well. And you're a sister after my own heart, economic empowerment. That's what you're into. So give us an overview of what you're doing, how you got started in it, anything else you want to share about your work and about your life in general.
Could I first go back to this book?
Sure.
I think what is one of the interesting things about the title of it and this emblem is that at the core of community is this belonging. It's the ability of people to belong to something greater than themselves. And the fact that there is a structure to it, which means that it can be seen, it can be understood. It's not amorphous, it's not in your head. It's as tangible as your arm is. And so being able to think about community and the very core of what community means, which is to create an environment in which people belong. The environment in which most people never belong and needed to be reclaimed is the economic system.
Yes.
And so within my community, I was watching so many people be just a cog, faithless, spiritless, soulless, a means of production for some company, as opposed to a human being that belonged to a process in which they owned what came out of it. So in reclaiming economics, we went back. Hawaiians, in times of great uncertainty, we always say to each other, Nana ike kumu, which means look to the source.
Look to the source.
Look to the source. Kumu is the source, and the source is where your teaching lies. So when you look to the source, you look to the very principles that are right in the center of who you are. And I'm sure that your community here has those principles. So I'd like to talk about a couple of them, which really, upon those principles, we built a project that it was disguised as a project, but really it was an economic philosophy and an economic way of helping people wrestle with the value of their sweat.
Okay. And I want you to speak as loudly as you can, because I want people to hear this. I don't want anybody to miss this.
Maybe it starts with the idea of self-sufficiency. Who is the self? Where I come from, the tradition is that self is more than me. Self is all of us. And it's not just humans. Self includes the birds and the trees. That is part of myself. And how we relate to even those entities, those energies that have no voice in the ways humans do, our ability to include them in our world and make sure how we treat them is with honor and dignity really allows the whole system to be integrated and not to use even nature just to forward the interests of humans.
Okay.
So we looked around at our culture and we began to think the place where people are most vulnerable is in food. Both the ability to buy, and not just any food, not spam in a can, but to have the best food possible is outside of the reach of most people's pocketbooks. So in Appalachia, a place that I have great affection and understanding of, people always had gardens.
Oh, yes.
And it was in those gardens that people could maintain their whole family. So we went back, we went to that way of thinking about really what a family, what your backyard is, as your closest place of economics. I control my backyard.
That's right.
And as I can control and make productive my backyard, then that can feed my family. So we started to look at aquaculture because our people are ocean people and we eat a lot of the fish and the things that come out of the sea. But the ocean has become inaccessible to us. Because of modern ways of developing, it has poisoned the inshore reefs.
Right.
And so where people ordinarily would just throw a pole or would go diving to find the fish, depleted. And so in order to fish, you needed to have a boat. You needed to have gasoline. So that created much more cost that most families in my community, we had no ability to have that.
So nobody came and set up a program for you to bring you the food that you needed?
No.
In Hawaii?
No, and bring it in a way that we could understand how it was made. So we thought, what is it about fish? And in traditional Hawaiian communities, we had fisheries. We used to build fish ponds in our oceans so that we would gather the fish, they would grow there. And in its season, we would know precisely where to go. People weren't wandering all around looking for these fish, you know? They were here, and they were our relatives. So the relationship is kinship. I feed the fish, then the fish feeds me. And so it's on the basis of this kinship that the core of our economic system really had to be based. So our smallest unit that we were willing to work with was the family. And the family as you defined it. So it wasn't just mother, father, and the children. It could be your aunt, your uncle, your grandmother, your cousin who lived way on the other side of the island. Whoever was part of your family, that's who we wanted to work with. We also understood that to put all of this responsibility on one person, and usually in aquaculture, it looks like a very male-oriented process. And so it was men who were calling us up saying, I want to learn how to do this. But we knew that one person couldn't do everything that needed to be done. But in the family, you had all the skills. Every one of them. So, family-based, kinship-based. The other value is we believe that work is medicine. And that work should bring health and well-being to who you are, and dignity and honor. So a lot of people who came to our project had jobs, but they had no work. So at the end of, during
That's
the process.
That's significant too. They had jobs but no work.
They had no work. So when you ask
What do you
them,
call work? How would you what's the difference? Say more about that.
the work, most people, the second thing that they ask you after they ask you your name, they ask you what you do.
What do you do?
Yeah. So lots of the people in our project, they would stay silent because they had no pride in doing the jobs that they had. But after they started doing this work, they would say, I grow fish for my community. And that became their work. And it's in that work that we saw the pride and the healing of that man, that woman, that family. And because
And it also, I'm sorry to cut you off,
ahead,
it also speaks to what Peter just said, that one of those nest words, connectedness.
Yeah.
I do work, I raise fish or sell fish or grow fish for my community.
Yeah.
Not just I grow fish,
Exactly.
Yeah.
I sell fish. It's for my community. That creates that.
And those
connected-
fish created community, because now I grow this fish. I can take it to my neighbor. I can give you fish.
Right.
You give me squash.
Oh, yes.
You know?
I like that.
And it became that, and it wasn't barter. It was kokua. It was sharing.
Kokua, share.
Kokua. And so that was the other principle at the core of our economic system is kokua. I help you. You owe me nothing. You help somebody else who needs what you have. And that, as an economic system, a core of an economic system, is both visible and invisible. And it has responsibilities without being a job description.
Right.
You know?
See, that's so interesting. Every church would espouse those principles of kindness and generosity.
That's right.
Yeah.
Except when it comes to economics.
Exactly. That's right.
And so this is kind of an economic spirituality.
Right, right.
And I think that's what
And that's the core of what economics
That's
is,
what
isn't it?
sustains it. People always want to say, well, if you've got this going, how do you sustain it? Well, the reason it's not sustainable is because it doesn't have a larger context within to operate. And in our culture, entrepreneurship is so individualistic.
That's right.
We
That's
call
right.
it the free market, which is a lie. There's
Yeah.
no freedom
That's
in
right.
this
You're
market.
right. You got that right.
And there's not even a freedom. So I would love to see churches be the organizing agency to create a spiritual economics.
I have spoken about
Communal
that to
economics.
churches, to church groups
Well-
across this country. And you just hit the nail on the head. That's where the core of all of this should be. It
That's
should
the
reside,
strongest
because-
institution
That's right.
in our
and it
neighborhoods.
fits within the principles that
Absolutely.
they're espousing every day, really.
Can I give you a South African example?
Sure.
I met a woman last year, and she told the story about her family. One of the things her family had was a large tree in their yard. And the tree gave shade. There would be people who would come by and would sit under the shade of their tree. And the next day, there would be a squash. Or there would be a bunch of bananas. And it wasn't something that they bartered or gave, but they were grateful for the shade of this tree that they could get nowhere else. But that's a unit of economics.
Sure.
And that's because of that shade that that tree gave, their family survived. Through all the blessings that people came because they knew that the shade was blessing.
Yes.
So there are so many opportunities.
Now, would you say that's because part of what economics teaches us is it's a study of scarcity.
Scarcity. Yes.
Now, what you're describing is a study of abundance. isn't
Abundance.
it?
Right.
So that's
an
what you're
attitude
inventing.
of abundance, an
Right.
attitude
Yes.
So you're reframing what economics is about.
or
And you're reframing competition. You don't
Going
use the word
back to
competition,
cool.
do you?
no, I don't. I wonder why. But it's that notion of going back to the source,
Right.
which is we are, and I don't know if abundance is the right word also.
How about availability?
Or there is enough
Yeah,
if
there's
we
enough.
shared it.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and that's the other core of kokua, in sharing. Everybody can have enough.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You know, and that, I think that's the attitude of the black economics.
Sure. And you said return to the source. In African parlance, we have a term, sankofa, return to the source. It's a bird that looks back, and the deeper meaning is that we should always return to the source to learn and to glean from our history the things that we should be doing today. And you just described it in the Hawaiian sense. And give us that term again. Return to the source.
Nana Ike Kumu.
Nana Ike Kumu. All right, I have to remember that. So you have this initiative,
The Backyard Aquaculture Project.
Backyard Aquaculture Project, where you're growing fish for the community. Let me always say that. And at what stage do you? Well, no, that's not the right direction for that question. The community is involved, and you did describe things starting within the household, which we know economics, that's the pure definition of it, managing one's household. And you showed how it expands out to what we call in this society the extended family, the aunts and uncles and grandmothers, because when I was growing up, my great-grandmother lived with us. Yeah. And a lot of families had that same kind of experience. So you have encompassed an initiative that is not individualistic, it is communal, and it is sharing, collective, yes, collective empowerment.
See, now, if this was reported on in the evening news, the headline would be socialism.
That's right.
In Hawaii.
Right. That's right.
We are so terrified. So your language is very powerful. So this is the communal, it is the collective. Yeah. And it's backyard economics. And what we call them are cottage industries. Yeah. Like if you go into most neighborhoods, there's lots of people that are selling things. You know, whether it's candy or sewing. Yeah. And
what do they call
honor that?
What's the word I've forgotten in Israel? The
kibbutz.
Kibbutz.
The kibbutz was set up as a self-sustaining economic system, so that there's a circular flow of assets or wealth or money that stays within the neighborhood, within the community. This is why you're speaking about the local economy, the politics of a dollar. Why would I spend it in a big box store? Because I'm stabbing. And it's related to everything. I was thinking this morning that, you know, we care about safety. And I'm sure if Cecil was on here, he was talking about safety.
Yeah, a little. We talk more about economic stuff.
But if a store is empty, that's what makes that street unsafe.
That's right.
Not criminals, not the lack of police. A criminal isn't a police deficiency. It's an economic deficiency. Crime is an economic deficiency. And so we can't afford to have our storefronts empty. Right. And so that's what and that's what you're doing here. Is you're filling up the local economy. Yeah. In a beautiful way.
What's the economic impact in general from what you're doing with the aquaculture project?
Well, you know, when we first began, we were going to do it the way that industrial aquaculture takes place. You dig a big hole in the ground, and then what we figured out was that would teach or employ maybe 7 people who were highly technically skilled. But that wouldn't increase the skill base of our community. So once we gave up that industrial model of aquaculture and went back to the backyard and figured out a system that would fit there, we went and we had consultants who grew up in the Rodale process and in Peace Corps, who had common people's technology, and we reworked it. So here's one way of measuring the economic impact. The children who are attached to the project, they learn, I work, I eat. And the power of their work to produce something for the family that they can eat, because this fish ends up on their table. Okay. They also learn that what I earn from here and the fish that we actually market, that can buy me something that I cannot have otherwise. Families would buy auto insurance with the money that they earned from this one tank of fish, because now they had enough money to be able to pay for this auto insurance that they couldn't pay for just with their job. Right. But they didn't have to get on a car and go 25 miles out of the community. They could stay right in their yard with their children, earn this money, and yet have enough to buy a necessity.
That's just
Isn't that
so
amazing?
It's
right
an
to do.
impact of not money, but it brought comfort to the family.
Mhm.
And then what those kids would do is they would bring their classmates to their backyard to see the project.
Mhm.
And the kids would tell what they
They
were
would-
raising,
right.
how, and this is what I have to do. It brings honor and dignity to the child.
Yes.
And so how you measure and quantify those things, you know, that happiness way of measuring economics that Bhutan is very famous for introducing, I think we really have to seriously think about how we measure the impact of true economics
Mhm.
in the quality, not necessarily of life, but quality of being,
Mm.
and how you think about yourself,
Yes. Yes.
and how you feel about yourself and your neighbors.
Mhm.
That is valued, I think, not high enough.
Right. Oh, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't
a great-
hold that in such high esteem.
It's a great
the way we
framework.
used to.
Well, I think the question is great, so because everybody says, so what is the economic impact?
Yeah.
And what you're saying is it can't be measured by the flow of dollars.
Dollars.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
It can be measured by what capacity of a family now that wasn't there before. So you almost have to look hard at every family and say, how has their life changed?
Mhm.
And the
You can't just
capacity
do
for
it
them
by
to
the
work
gross
together. Yes.
product of that neighborhood.
And we have gotten so far to the extreme in terms of measuring our worth based upon.
That's all there is.
Wrong
How much
thing.
you
What's the
earn.
headline every day?
Exactly.
Financial crisis. I'm
That's
not
right.
interested in those banks.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Why is that the headline?
Yeah.
Why not this story being the headline?
I had a meeting just last night. I didn't have the meeting. I went to a meeting of a neighbor. He convenes these meetings of men. We just talk about different things, talk about biblical things and religion and all of that. And we were talking about work and the value of work. And he pointed out, as Scripture showed us this DVD, and pointed out some things that we overlook when it comes to work. And again, not jobs, but work. And how valuable it is, and the dignity, and all the things that we're sitting here talking about, so that we can change our thinking around this notion of work. And I discussed that many times during the height of the civil unrest here, and you're sitting in the neighborhood where most of it took place in over the Rhine. And I was wondering, I know you've only been here a short time, but I'm sure Peter shared with you some of that, and you can read about it in his book as well. Do you see any parallels, or any, not parallels, but
Yeah.
relationships between where you live, and describe for us where you live, or this community that you are talking about, versus or compared to over the Rhine and some of the things that happened here?
I live in a community called Waianae. It's a rural community on the island of Oahu. And there are 50,000 people who live in this community. And over half of us are Native people, but over half of the people who live in Waianae are under 19 years old.
Wow.
So the ability to create a system that can impact those young people,
Yes.
very important. Our community is thought of as being an impoverished, poor community, a ghetto community.
It's a labeled community, isn't
Labeled.
it?
It's
Yeah.
labeled.
Yeah.
But we also are a very fierce community. And we're very famous for the level of activism within our community and our ability to organize ourselves. And so there is that balance of power, so when politicians are running, they always want to come and campaign in our community.
Yes.
Did you vote?
Because we
Yes.
vote, we mean something. When
Yeah.
people vote for you from our community, it's saying something about the quality of who you are. And so I think the power of the parallel between us is that we understand the possibilities and the power of possibilities as not something imagined, but something present that needs to be awakened.
You're living it.
I am.
Yeah, especially with the initiative that you talked about. And, I promote in my speeches around the country and in my writings, urban gardens, and hydroponics and how we can use what we have
Yeah.
to produce something and to sell it, to turn it into an entrepreneurial venture, and to have that circulate in our communities as we develop our communities from mere neighborhoods. It is real important. And when they built the City West project down on Lynn Street, I was meeting with the head of the housing department then, and I talked about, I wanted to know, what's your plan for this? I knew they were going to build some nice homes. I said, what about business development? You really can't have a community if you don't have any business going on there. And what you just described is the people didn't have to go 25 miles.
Yeah.
They could do it right there.
Yeah.
Now, in this community called City West, there are many people there, but all the storefronts are vacant. And people have to go away or out of the community to shop and to work, when if you have brand new homes, hundreds and thousands of people living there, it seems to me that you're going to need maybe a child care business, a security business,
How about food?
Painting, catering. All kinds of businesses should have come from that development. All kinds of opportunities for businesses. And I think that's where we miss the boat. We get into housing development only, and there are no businesses. And then we look around 20 years later, and the houses are, you know, everything's gone down. Well, how did that happen? Why did that happen? We had brand new places. There's no capturing of the assets, the business assets, within that
reside
with
there.
that reside there. And it's so obvious to me that we have opportunities in these segments, geographical segments, as you just described. People call where you live an impoverished neighborhood or the ghetto or whatever people want to call it, but that's from an outside perspective.
Yeah.
You know what you're doing there, and you're doing some very positive things there, and it's empowering to the people who live there.
Can I tell you a story?
Sure.
I do a process called, it's part of a larger process called building the beloved community. But this process is called Guts on the Table.
Guts on the
Guts
table.
on the table. And it comes from
This is
the,
technology.
Yeah, right.
from the Hawaiian idea that the best place where people think is below their belly button. It's in this place where your gut is. And so getting people to think from there and to respond in meetings and gatherings from this place as opposed to from here or from the emotions alone is what this process strives to do. So I ask you to tell 3 stories. First, to tell the story of all of their names. And when they tell that story, they tell the story of their people, where they come from, why this name is important to them and why it was given to you and how you carry it. The second is to tell the story of their community and how they experience what a community is. But the third is to tell the story of their gift. Not their skill, not your education, not your title, but your gift. So I did this process with a group of high schoolers in my community. And we went around the circle of about 11 young people. And this one kid, when it was his turn, he told the story of his name and his community well. But when it came to the gift, he said, what kind of gift you think I have? I'm in this special ed class. You know, I have a hard time read and hard time, what kind of gift
We
do you
all
think I
have
have?
gifts. Yeah.
So 2 weeks later, I saw him in our store, and he came up to me and he said, Auntie, I've been thinking about your question of what my gift. He said, you know, I cannot do that reading and I cannot write to it, but when I go in the ocean, I can call the fish, and the fishy come every time. I can put food on my family's table every single time. And then I look at him and I said, brother, I hope when you grow up, you're going to think, my wife have gift, my children have gift.
Yeah.
How am I going to support them? And then when I work with teachers and administrators, I ask them, what would his life have been like if this school was gift-based? If this curriculum was gift-based? What if our communities were gift-based?
Yeah.
We saw and understood the gifts of our people and incorporated that into our economic system. And
Yeah.
so, you know, it's a different,
It's a context that you've
Yeah.
shifted.
and it's
Yes.
an old context.
This
Right.
is your
Going
work,
back
Jim.
to the core.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where the parallels are. I
Right.
think.
Right.
You know, maybe we need to start these businesses.
Yes. Yes.
And I think the context with Pooh and what she says, which is all about gifts, it's about community. It's not just financial literacy. It's not a business plan. Most of our efforts to help support entrepreneurs, we force them, teach them to do it as if the business plan.
Right, but that's not.
But
that's
in
not
the context of what we have now, that business plan is going to stay on a shelf.
Yeah, you're right. You're right, and a lot of them do.
Yeah.
A lot of them do.
It's just a wonderful language. See, your way of speaking almost brings that world even into us right now.
Right.
Listening, you can feel the world, and so it's almost, you say, well, how do we create a conversation about the economic possibility
Yes.
of these houses on the West End? So it's not just who's going to open a business there, but how does that neighborhood decide
Exactly.
that that business will be theirs?
Right. Right. It's about ownership, and you talk
Yeah,
about ownership
exactly.
in the book. It's real
Exactly.
important. Ownership and power. And one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, Peter, was this whole notion of power. And I remember reading something that you had in the book about the power to decide.
To choose and to name.
Yes, yes.
Right?
Yes.
So power is the capacity through your language to create a future distinct from the past. It's different than force.
Yeah,
See,
yeah.
Force comes when I have no power, when I feel that I cannot initiate another future for myself.
Right.
So the work in our neighborhoods is to bring people together so they get connectedness. You create that condition.
Right.
And then you begin to say to them, so what's the future? What can you name and give voice to? The possibility of Mount Airy Business District.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And somehow if people can't do that, then all the business stuff isn't going to work.
Right.
It's going to be done out of a context of scarcity, individualism, price, all of that conversation.
Yeah.
And that's the power is the ability to initiate something in the world, is to bring something in the world that wasn't there. That's powerful.
That's right. That's right.
Everything else is forceful.
Yeah.
You want experts to come in, you want funding, you want a city program. Nothing wrong with any of that, but it doesn't create it doesn't create a future.
Yeah.
It just creates a program.
And doesn't create ownership either.
And this place is mine to create. I love the idea of backyard economics. Suppose we start a backyard economics program in a neighborhood in one place in Cincinnati,
Right.
where there's 6 people that are interested. That's all it takes.
Now, at our church, we have some acreage of land, and then behind the church, we have this plot of land that we have carved out for gardening. And each member can have his or her own little plot. It's rope, in a little string, and this is yours, your name is on it. And we raise all kinds of produce every year. So much so that I've started talking to the elders and the minister about, let's turn part of this into a business for our young people, to not only show them how to grow food, as you talked about, but to deal with the inventory and the cost of goods sold and all those practical things in business, and then sell it, and create a Saturday produce stand or something.
Marketplace.
Somewhere. Yeah, marketplace.
Marketplace in every traditional culture is the meeting place.
Exactly.
And the product is an excuse for us to get together.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And look at all the benefit you get. And you describe some of those benefits from the young people that you're working with, as well as the adults too, because our adults have a lot to learn too.
If I listen to what Pooh is saying, maybe you have a surplus in this little economy called a community garden.
Definitely.
So what do you do with that surplus? So if I listen carefully to what you're saying, I would say, where can we give that away as a service to the community, and then see what comes back.
What comes back, that's right.
So it doesn't get monetized.
Yeah, right.
You don't worry about monetizing it.
That's a good point.
But maybe this Saturday marketplace is simply for gifts. Maybe it's a gifted economy. And if you want to give something away in our neighborhood, you come here on Saturday and find somebody to give it to. And so it becomes a place of exchange.
Yeah.
And you don't have to.
And everybody can have enough of what they need.
Yeah.
Everybody can have enough.
We have a visible space in which the fact that we have enough. We just haven't shared it.
Right. I've often written that if each of us gives a little all of us can have enough.
Yeah.
All of us
This
will
is a
have
stone
enough.
soup story.
And that's what it's about.
Yeah.
This whole notion of ownership and power, Peter, are very very important
Yeah.
considerations
Yeah.
for us, especially when you talk about economic empowerment. And I can't stress enough our need to understand power, what it is, where, how it's derived and all of those things, and then how it should be used so that more can benefit.
So it produces more. It doesn't consume itself.
Exactly.
So it becomes power with grace.
Yes.
And it's not power with the fist. It's power as an offer.
And I noticed you wrote a lot about, not a lot, but considerable amount about how we do a lot of talking about these kinds of things, and the inappropriate questions that we ask
Exactly.
that don't lead to anything.
You read that book.
And how we show up at meetings and yell and scream, and that's about it. And I said the same thing. I said the same thing.
All right.
And the other thing, how we talk a lot about it, and how the radio talk shows dominate.
Get rid of the AM band. I want to get, unless you're on it, unless you're on it, get rid of the AM band, boycott the first 15 minutes of the evening news, because those conversations become a limitation to be powerful. If as soon as I complain about you, I've given up power. Now I find it satisfying, but it's not powerful, because I can't wait for your transformation. See, what Pooh has done is organized families to say we have the capacity within this circle to create the future we want. Now others were organizing in her neighborhood, let's go get those people.
Right.
See that house on the hill, let's get that son of a bitch. All right, instead of saying what do we want to produce for ourselves. So complaint under the rubric of protest is forceful, but it's not powerful.
Right. Good.
My fish
analogy.
feeds the guy on the hill.
Mm.
Ultimately, he has to come and eat my food.
The guy on the hill has to come, come to you.
And when he comes to eat my food,
you welcome him, don't you?
then we can have an exchange of spirit then.
Yeah.
Then we have a language to share.
So community building is about what can we produce together.
That's right. Together.
Together.
That's right. That's the key word.
The
together.
Churches.
Yes.
What a great movement for the churches is how do we produce more for our community.
That's right.
And I think that's the context in which then you can teach people something about entrepreneurship.
Yes.
And we've got this project going, this entrepreneur project, where the key is to surround people who have that desire with a kind of an extended family that will create with them. So they have advisors, they have elders, they have mentors. And that's what's missing in most of our efforts, is we still let the entrepreneur function as an individual rather than being part of a community.
And that gets back to conversations that we had back during the civil unrest here, that people gathered around and said, oh, what can we do? Oh, we had this terrible incident, and what can we do so that it won't happen again? And a lot of people, believe it or not, were throwing out solutions such as, well, we need more recreation for the kids. We need summer jobs for the kids, and all. Nobody ever said we need entrepreneurial training. We need ownership. Because
we need economic self-sufficiency.
Economic self-sufficiency. If we own more of the community where we live, or more of the neighborhood, then we're less inclined to tear it down, destroy it. And if our families owned it, and we saw the role models every day with small business owners going, doing their thing right where we live, then we turn this thing around. We change the images and the examples that our children are seeing every day.
You know where the least vandalized segment of our troubled communities are? Community gardens. Nobody vandalizes community gardens. For just the reason you're saying, because this is ours. I'm not going to destroy what's mine.
Yeah.
And there's no vandalism.
Wow. It's so.
And there's no security guards there either.
Yeah. The only vandals that we have at our church garden are the deer. We're going to put up things to keep the deer out. But you're right. There's an abundance of food there every year, and sometimes, like you said, it's just so much we can't even use it all. So we have to be able to use that. Like you said, don't waste anything, right? And get it out there and do something positive with it. And I'm just so impressed with what you are doing with one piece at a time in Hawaii. And I am going to stay connected to you to learn more about what you're doing and try as much as possible to share that information with as many as I come in contact with around this country. What else would you like to share about your program, about what you're doing at home, or even what you have done here?
Or this
you mentioned
conversation.
Appalachia. Yeah. So you've been here, I mean, you've done work here, or you?
I have.
Okay.
I went to Highlander, in New Market, Tennessee, and that's
Okay.
really where I learned about our parallel lives.
Okay.
So at Highlander, I really understood the generosity and hospitality of the Appalachian culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that
We have a huge, maybe 35% of Cincinnati
Yeah.
is Appalachian.
Yeah, yeah. My mother is from West Virginia, in the coal mine area. Matter of fact, I was on the internet last week looking at some of the old pictures of the town that she grew up in called Helen, West Virginia. It's hardly there anymore.
Virginia.
Nothing but a mining town with the company store and the
Yep.
houses that they built for the people to live in and that kind of thing, And a community, you talk about a community, that's exactly what that was. Black and white, everybody, kind of pulling their own weight and doing what they had to do to take care of their families and to take care of the community. And what you're describing is exactly what I saw as I would go to West Virginia in the summer to visit my relatives and to visit her mother and father. That's what I saw. I didn't know I was looking at that, but that's exactly the example that we're talking about today.
Then the Highlander Center was a spiritual center, an organizing center.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we have an urban Highlander? Why don't we start an
Yeah,
urban Highlander
yeah.
in Cincinnati?
Urban, that's right. Yeah.
Think that's possible?
Yeah.
You know what you say about the possibilities. I know we can do it.
The answer is yes.
Yes, right. That's right. Right. And that's in what part of Tennessee?
New
Eastern.
New Market.
That's in Eastern. New Market,
It's
Tennessee.
a
I've
four-
never
it's a
been
4-hour
Close to
drive. A
Knoxville.
bunch of us went there last year.
there. Yeah.
Just
okay.
with the thought of learning.
Close to
from that
Knoxville, on the
country.
other side of Knoxville.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Eastern Tennessee. Okay, I figured that. Yeah, in the mountains, the coal mines and
And
everything. That's
if
right.
people are interested in that, there is a group talking about what would an urban Highlander. Great to have you part of that.
Mhm.
And over at the Peasley Center,
Okay.
with Kate Feddick runs that. And
Okay.
part of her thinking is, well, is there some way we can be a different kind of organizing
Mhm.
center?
Mhm.
But I think the business, the economics, is the portal through which you have to walk, because Ben Kaufman is a journalist who's written a lot about community gardens, and he says if you don't control your food, you don't control your life.
That's right. That's
Control
right.
And if you
the
don't control
stomach.
your own sustenance, whether
That's
it's food or the means to trade for that food or
That's right.
a gift for that food,
I am
then
so
you
glad
have,
you're
then
saying
all,
that.
you have no control of your life.
Right. I was in Detroit last year for a meeting, and we talk a lot about urban gardens and feeding ourselves and being able to provide our own sustenance at a minimum. And I learned in the city of Detroit, there is no supermarket. In the whole city of Detroit, you have to leave the city to go to a supermarket. The city is 85 to 90% black populated, and there is no supermarket there.
Exactly.
And I said, if you can't provide your own sustenance, and there's a lot of land in Detroit because there are a lot of vacant lots and all of that. I said,
Right.
put some seeds in the ground and then grow some food. That's the least that
Let's
we can
create
do.
a,
And
let's
there are
create a
couple of
plantation that we
programs there.
control.
Exactly. Control your own plantation. And there are a couple of good programs there that do that. But that's a glowing example of what you just said. If we can't provide our own sustenance, we really have a whole lot of work to do. And it's getting to that in circles, in areas in this country that we need to pay more attention to. We have probably about 5 minutes. And let's see if we can get some summaries from you guys. What would you like to leave here in Cincinnati? What thought, what words of wisdom can you give us?
Well, I don't know about that, but In Hawaii, what I think about is the ability to reclaim your symbols, reclaim public spaces. And public spaces are in the mind as well. And when you reclaim people's symbols and how they think about things, you reclaim that space in their head. So using economic development as a way of reclaiming that very public space in people's lives, very important. And the closer you get it to where they control, like their backyards, or their household, their family, the more possible it becomes, I think, for people to understand their impact on a wider world.
Okay. Good, good. Peter, I think we only have about 30 seconds, 45 seconds or so. Give me something.
Well, one is gratitude for what you're doing with the city.
Thank you.
And you're trying to shift the way we think, which is difficult, frustrating, invisible.
Tell me about it.
I just want to thank you
I
for
appreciate
who you are and what you do with the city.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Very much.
Punani Burgess from Hawaii, I appreciate you
Aloha.
being here. Peter, as always, I appreciate the
pleasure.
work that you do as well. And to you viewers, I'm just so happy that we had this time to spend together talking about the things that we've talked about here, economic empowerment especially. And I look forward to being with you again. Yeah, Peter.
If there are entrepreneurs out there that would like to be part of a larger movement or program, if they could contact you.
Sure. Oh,
Part
yes,
of
my
it is
number's
we
always
need
on the screen.
entrepreneurs to step forward and say, I want to try to create something.
That's right.
That would be great.
That's right. Anyone listening, you can watch or watching, you just call me or go to my website and send me an email, as usual, as you will do. I appreciate you. God bless all of you, and I look forward to the next show. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Mahalo.
Amen.